Good morning. This is the Energy and Carbon Management Commission regular session meeting. Um, I am John Messner. I'm acting chair for today. We are aware and understand that we're having some technical issues associated with the website that is not enabling some participants to be able to access the meeting today. We have been told that this should be resolved within the hour. And so what our plan of action here this morning is we'll take a roll call of commissioners to open the meeting, and then we're going to adjourn the meeting until 10 a.m. and then start again, where hopefully the technical issues associated with people being able to access the meeting through the Zoom link and the homepage on our website will be resolved, and then we will start again at 10 a.m. And we will begin right off the bat with the agenda item of the APCD aerial survey monitoring phase 2 and Martinez-Irwin follow-up presentation directly at 10 a.m. and then continue with the rest of the posted agenda as it is listed on the agenda. So with that, commissioners, or I guess first we should do a roll call. And then we will adjourn until 10 a.m.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Ackerman.
Here.
Commissioner Cross.
Present.
Commissioner McGowan.
Here.
Commissioner Mesner.
Here.
Commissioner Oath. Commissioner Ray.
Here.
Commissioner Robbins. Mr. Chair, you have 5 out of 7 commissioners present.
Thank you. And so as indicated, we are now going to adjourn the meeting until 10 a.m. Hopefully the technical issues associated with people being able to access the meeting will be resolved at that point. It is important that the public is able to access our meetings because we do strive for transparency, and our goal is to meet the open meetings law associated with our proceedings. And so we'll see everyone at 10 a.m. Thank you. We needed to pause our meeting due to some technical difficulties associated with people being able to access the website in order to be able to access our meetings. And so with that, we are reconvening the ECMC August 23rd general meeting. We did already do a roll call of commissioners earlier before we adjourned until 10 a.m. And understanding that there's a number of folks that are joining us today from the Air Quality Control Commission, we're going to go ahead and skip up to the APCD aerial survey monitoring phase 2 presentation so that the AQCC commissioners who have taken time out their day to join us are able to participate in that discussion. And in that presentation. So again, my name is John Messner. I'm one of the commissioners with the Energy and Carbon Management Commission. Chairman Robbins is unable to make the meeting today, so I'll be acting chair. Excited to have the commissioners from AQCC joining us today. I see that they're now being populated on the screen and as part of our panel for the presentation here this morning. And so with that, I believe Ben Hamil, who's CDPA Chief Physical Sciences Researcher, is going to be presenting to us here this morning the findings from the APCD Aerial Survey Monitoring Phase 2 project. Mr. Hamil is here, and tell me how to pronounce your name so I don't butcher it the entire meeting.
It's okay. It's Ben Meal.
Meal. Okay. And I think we'll give it just a second to allow any additional AQCC commissioners to join us. Kyle, we already did a roll call at the very beginning of the meeting. Would you like us to do it again?
Oh, my apologies. No, I'm sorry. I missed that part. Thank you.
Yeah, so we did a roll call at the beginning of the meeting and then adjourned until 10 a.m. So Ms. Amaro or Deputy Director Larson, are there other folks that need to be brought up to the panel from the AQCC, or do we have who we need now?
Ms. Amaro can correct me, but I believe we've brought in everyone we can find. If there are AQCC commissioners who are in the meeting and would like to raise their hand, we'll make sure to bring them up as a panelist.
Right.
Okay. Well, Mr. Meal, I'm gonna give you the floor and interested to see your presentation. So thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Let me share my screen here. Are my slides showing up?
They are, yes.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, commissioners, for giving me your time today. I'm going to be presenting on the APCD's aerial methane monitoring projects. I am with the Air Pollution Control Division in the Office of Innovations and Planning. Just as a bit of recap in terms of the motivation, a lot of the motivation for this started with the Martin S. Irwin Memorial Funding projects. And so throughout the 2010s, scientific literature had showed oil and gas emission inventories frequently underestimate methane emissions versus what we measure in the atmosphere. So that is the inventories, what is reported, frequently underestimating versus what we actually measure when we go out in the field and measure with aircraft, instrumentation, and so on. And this is most pronounced in the upstream and midstream segments. So a portion of the MI funding aimed to explore this for the DJ Basin in Colorado. And this data collection that we've gathered over the past several years has informed the development of the APCC regulation number 7 updates to what we call the GHG intensity verification rule. And so we talked, this was passed about a month ago. And this sets an upper threshold on greenhouse gas emissions per BOE production. So beginning in 25, upstream operators will be required to do one of two things: either develop their own measurement informed inventory using direct measurements, or utilize state supported measurements to adjust their methane inventory by a default factor to account for this well-established gap in reporting. And so that's kind of just a bit of a context for where the motivation for these measurements is really kind of coming from. And so first, I'm going to talk about phase 1, which was essentially the last 2 years, largely funded by the Martin S. Irwin Memorial projects, to give us this background. And then after I go through phase 1, I'll talk about the future projects over the next couple of years. And so just as a quick summary, there were 5 major projects funded. This is Carbon Mapper's plume imaging efforts. The CU Boulder and the University of Maryland did an aerial mass balance program using aircraft. Also Scientific Aviation, now known as Champion X, did some aircraft flights. Colorado State University and the University of Wyoming partnered to do some driving surveys. And then Colorado State University is still currently developing this MEAT model, which gives a more mechanistic understanding of how the emissions proceed from oil and gas facilities. So I'm only going to be talking about a few of these today. I'm trying to keep all my comments high level, but I'm happy to, if questions come up, go more deep into the technical components of these projects. So first, I'll be talking about Carbon Mapper's aerial surveys. I believe this was already presented in a prior presentation before my time here at the division, but in summary, Carbon Mapper has completed 3 campaigns so far: 2 weeks in the Denver-Julesburg in the summer of 2021, 2 weeks in the fall of 2021, about 2 months later, and then one short campaign of about a week in the Piceance region, a little less than a year ago. Carbon Mapper's aircraft is able to detect large point sources, so on the order of 10 to 100 kilograms per hour or greater. Several major pipeline leaks were located and mitigated within days of detection. Essentially, as soon as the aircraft found it, we were notified of it and we contacted the parties right away to get crews out there to mitigate these leaks. In addition to oil and gas facilities, the Carbon Mapper's aircraft is also capable of detecting large emissions from landfills, coal, and agriculture sites as well. So just kind of one quick summary of their results in the DJ Basin. In the summer of 2021, they found a nearly equal within uncertainty balance between the oil and gas point sources of about 2.5 metric tons per hour for oil and gas, and agriculture, largely the animal feeding operations, at 2.2 metric tons per hour. Then when they came back 2 months later, the discrepancy was much different. The oil and gas sources had grown to about 4.25 tons per hour, and the agriculture sources had decreased. Part of the agriculture sources decrease has to do with temperature. It's partially expected coming later in the year, but the oil and gas wasn't as much expected this way. Interestingly enough, the 5 days of measurements that they performed in the Peons campaign found a similar total emissions as fall of, oh, I'm sorry, that should be fall of 2022. My apologies for the typo there. The 5-day campaign found similar total emissions as the fall of 2022, about 4.5 metric tons per hour from only a quarter as many sources. So that kind of puts a flag in us that we should be kind of investigating this region a little bit more, because the Peons has been a little less studied in terms of measurement campaigns than the DJ Basin. And so Carbon Mapper's data, their past data is all publicly available at their website, data.carbonmapper.org, and their future data will be published there as well. And they just recently updated their platform with a new interface and everything about a month ago. So I encourage stakeholders to go and check out their website. Additionally, as I mentioned before, CU Boulder and the University of Maryland performed these mass balance campaigns. These were kind of follow-up measurements to flights that were done by CU Boulder and NOAA in 2012 and 2015. Broadly speaking, the mass balance technique works by flying an aircraft around the perimeter of an entire region. And you can think of the atmosphere as flowing like a river, at least under stable atmospheric conditions. So what they do is they fly a transect on the upstream side of the river and then go around and fly a transect on the downstream side of the river. Essentially, they measure the methane entering the river beforehand, and they measure the methane exiting the river afterwards. And then any change in that methane between those two transects largely results of the methane added to the river during that time. The systematics are a little more complex than that, obviously. This is a simplification, but they were able to perform 2 successful mass balance flights on October 1st and 5th, and largely dependent on getting those favorable wind conditions where the atmosphere behaves like that river. And so what they found is that this table here shows just a summary table of all of these other mass balance type campaigns, as well as one satellite analysis performed by the University of Arizona concurrent with this campaign, but using a completely separate data set. They found very similar total methane emissions within the region, almost identical within uncertainties. However, their average measurement remained the same. They found a large variability, with the October 5th measurements being about 60% higher than October 1st. And so that kind of goes to the variability that is observed on a day-to-day region and that kind of really warrants us to get more measurements, more further study to understand how this variability proceeds. Another interesting observation they found was a significant decrease in the ethane emissions, essentially going down by a little more than a factor of 1/2 between the 2015 campaign and 2021. And this is likely a result of the Reg 7 improvements that were kind of put into place, which essentially had more command and control regulations limiting ethane emissions specifically. Scientific Aviation, now known as Champion X, performs a similar technique to the CU Boulder University of Maryland aircraft. They essentially fly a very, very small Mooney aircraft that samples the atmosphere as it goes by. They tend to fly more smaller patterns and, essentially circles, and doing that same kind of atmospheric river technique, but just kind of capturing it from a cluster of sites or smaller regions. Their technique is best used for a medium scale area flux quantification. And we've been really using them as reconnaissance flights to support these larger campaigns that we're kind of in the process of planning. And so that's just a brief summary of some of the most significant MI Fund projects. I'm happy to talk more details about the results as we go on. But really what I kind of wanted to talk more about is phase 2. What did we learn from those initial projects, and where are we going next? What additional measurements are we trying to do to further understand the dynamics of methane emissions from these areas? And so quickly, I'll return to Scientific Aviation, Champion X. We're going to continue reconnaissance flights to support larger campaigns. I'm actually in coordination with them to get out to the Peons region this week. Unfortunately, the rainstorms out there today and yesterday have kind of shut them down a bit, but we're hoping to get out later this week and kind of survey some of these key regions right here, where the inventory, essentially these gridded boxes in the background, that's kind of highlighting where our emission inventory suggests the largest methane emissions are. And we want to do some verification of this, go do some comparisons of the measurements to what the inventory says. Another thing we're working on with Scientific Aviation Champion X is to assist with ECMC objectives in the Raton Basin under Senate Bill 23-186. I'm currently in discussion with several staff from ECMC to kind of send Scientific Aviation down to the Raton to do both aircraft and drone surveys to quantify some of these seepage rates that have been observed in past campaigns and get an understanding for how much the seepage that is known to be happening in this area contributes to the total emissions that we see alongside the oil and gas facilities. So hoping to get them out there in September, October. We're currently going through scheduling and confirming that, but I'm happy to update the commission when we have results. Next, CU Boulder and University of Maryland are planning another aircraft campaign this fall. This is going to be a follow-up to the 2021 study. They'll have a couple of test flights and hopefully getting 8 flight days in the Denver-Julesburg Basin, as well as 3 days in the Piceance. This is essentially, again, trying to expand our understanding of these production regions outside just the Denver-Julesburg, which has been one of the most studied. They plan to do some further analyses on the 2021 flights to explore if there are other flight days that are suitable for that mass balance quantification. And this time they're bringing a Chevy Suburban with a mobile laboratory, as well as another truck-based mobile LiDAR instrument to help quantify the wind structure within the region, to do some additional on-the-ground support concurrent with the flight measurements. And so for this project, they'll have an interim report due at the middle of next summer and a final report due in June 2025. Carbon Mapper's aircraft is again coming to Colorado next month. This is going to be a focused campaign primarily on the Denver-Julesburg and Piceance region, but we're planning to have partial coverage to some smaller production regions. The map of the state in the bottom right-hand corner here kind of shows my prioritization that I developed. I think I sent this to Carbon Mapper on Monday, where we're essentially identifying the target regions where we want to have the most coverage, where we want to better understand these large emission sources, and then kind of like a traffic light, green, yellow, red, highest to lowest priority of some of the other regions we're trying to fly opportunistically. And you can see we're targeting primarily the core Denver-Julesburg and Piceance regions, but also trying to get some areas outside as well, because we know there are production regions and emissions happening outside of these core regions. One thing with regard to the Carbon Mapper campaigns is that we're planning to do some follow-ups with both APCD and ECMC inspectors, essentially triaging and investigating these plume detections. We've come up with a clever acronym called PHME, Potentially Hazardous Methane Event, where we're looking at one of 3 different criteria, either emissions that are exceedingly large, very persistent, and or near populated structures. And so depending on how many of those criteria any of these plumes fall under, we're going to essentially be sending out teams to follow up and kind of not just our teams, but also soliciting feedback directly from operators. And that'll include asking them which emissions are routine or anticipated and which emissions are actually mitigatable, because as we know, these are large emission plumes, and to some extent, some of them are expected via maintenance activities like well unloadings, blowdowns, swabbing operations, that sort of thing. But on the other hand, we have in the past seen mitigation potential with lots of the detections from Carbon Mapper. So we're hoping to be able to get a better understanding of what we're seeing from these platforms and how we can drive mitigation. We have another study that we're kicking off as a matter of fact, this week. This is with a different group at CU Boulder doing a research study based on the Tropomi satellite. There's been a number of satellite studies that have come out looking at the Denver-Julesburg region that some of them show similar emissions to other studies, some show different studies. And it's really kind of gotten us into a point where we're scratching our heads, where we're getting different results from the same measurement. And so we've kind of indicated that this needs a little bit more benchmarking and comparison. And so we've contacted these researchers to begin this kind of feasibility study of, first off, really asking the question, can Tropomi robustly quantify methane emissions in Colorado? Because one of the key things is the satellite only sees concentration, and it sees it very coarse. On the right, you can see this triangular polygon of the Denver-Julesburg region. And on the right is essentially what you kind of get from the satellite after modeling it alongside the winds. You get this very coarse picture of hotspot areas where it's more methane and less methane. And, we're trying to kind of dig in, can it robustly quantify emissions in Colorado? This is not the Front Range, and the atmospheric variability makes for a complex terrain compared to some other regions in the world. And so another question is, can the satellite capture seasonal variability in emissions? And then can we also segregate the oil and gas components using what we know about NOx emissions from the inventories? And then extending this also is the Piceance region is much more topographically complex, and it's kind of difficult for the satellite to understand. So it's really just a research study to say, what can we actually determine from these satellite measurements with confidence, and what is more speculative? And that's going to kind of found the generation for future satellite studies coming ahead. One thing I want to speak of is we're clever with our acronyms here. This is a Department of Energy project called SABRE, Site Air Basin Emissions Reconciliation Project. This is a $3 million study that was funded by the DOE to several teams, the Colorado State University, University of Wyoming, Penn State University, and Bridger Photonics. It's going to have 4 different components to it. Tall tower measurements are going to be established where essentially equipment is going to be set up at least sites where nearby cell phone towers to kind of quantify real-time methane emissions at all times at these sites surrounding the core part of the Denver-Julesburg Basin. University of Wyoming is going to be going out doing driving studies. Bridger Photonics is going to be deploying their aircraft LiDAR sensor to measure site-level methane emissions. And then Colorado State University is going to be combining all of this information alongside this mechanistic MEAT model to kind of look at, from this region, from all of these different sensors, what are the measurements saying, what is the inventory saying, and what is this mechanistic MEAT model saying? APCD is providing a $400,000 cost share to this project, essentially funding the development of the hardware and software costs for this instrumentation of the tower network. What we're going to get from that tower network is a monthly quantification of total and oil and gas contributions to emissions in the Denver-Julesburg. And then this project, will be funded by these research groups for a number of years, and then APCD will actually inherit the tower monitoring systems in June of 2025 to continue longer-term monitoring efforts. Additionally, there's another aircraft, Methane Air. This is an initiative supported by the Environmental Defense Fund. It's a nonprofit, essentially providing public data at no cost. Methane Air began flying oil and gas production regions throughout the country in June of 2023. So far, they've flown the Denver-Julesburg 4 times. Here's just a Flight Radar 24 mapping of where they've kind of targeted. Their aircraft is similar to carbon mappers, except they fly quite a bit higher in the atmosphere. So therefore, they can cover the entire region in 1 day rather than 2 days. And instead of focusing entirely on large source products, Methane Air's primary product is going to be these area aggregate emissions or gridded emission maps to try to understand what total emissions are from the region, or at the very least identify specific hotspots of emissions on the days in which they're flying. In addition, they will also be able to determine large, approximately 100 kilograms per hour or greater point sources, but still TBD what the exact detection limit is going to be. And so finally, the last thing I want to kind of talk about is the evolution of this methane monitoring ecosystem. As I've talked about before, most of these projects are kind of discrete campaigns where we have the aircraft for a period of weeks to a month. There's kind of a phase shift happening within the methane monitoring community with these, especially with these public data providers, Carbon Mapper and MethaneSat. Methane Air is the precursor instrument to the MethaneSat satellite. And so there's going to be the Carbon Mapper constellation of satellites, as well as the singular MethaneSat satellite that are launching next year. And these are public data platforms that are going to be giving emissions data free of charge to all stakeholders. And APCD is, preparing ourselves to use this data as much as we can to understand emissions from the region. And so this is going to be free and transparent data that the goal is that these platforms are putting out there is to drive understanding of emissions to support mitigation. And so, as I said, we're moving from this campaign basis where it's going to be happening, a few weeks a year, to more of this real-time monitoring that's going to be with the satellites that'll be flying over near constantly. At the very least, multiple times a month. And so you can see this on the image that I have on the right here is this carbon mapper's constellation of their target regions, largely focused on oil and gas production throughout the country. And so that's kind of the quick summary that I have of phase 2. I'm happy to take any questions that the commission may have.
Thank you, Mr. Meal, for that presentation. Lots of information there, lots of things going on. Commissioners, this is an opportunity now for folks to ask questions to Mr. Meal about the studies that have been undertaken or the studies that are being anticipated. So just raise your hand if you'd like to ask questions. Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Meal. It was a lot of information. That was helpful to have it all though together. I don't think I'm understanding. I think you said several times, a couple of the studies have shown that on average, methane emissions have not increased, but there's been incredible variability per each, whether it was a flyover or satellite, that shows a lot more for one flyover versus another. And that seems contradictory to me. I'm wondering if you could explain that.
Yeah, I'm happy to explain that. And so what we're finding specifically with the flights that CU Boulder and University of Maryland did this past year, they found a 60% difference between the 2 days in which they had the best conditions for quantification. And that really truly isn't surprising. It's possible that maintenance emissions or operational conditions can be different in the oil field one day versus another, whether it be different operators doing maintenance activity, different operators, or just unknown emissions. Additionally, landfills, waste operations, things like that can also be variable based on overburden pressure, temperature, and other conditions. But there's a difference that the inventories that we have are reporting annual emissions, right? And so we really need to get lots of measurements, repeat measurements, to understand this daily to monthly variability that is occurring, to really have confidence in what's being reported annually. I will mention that beginning in this reporting year, so the reports that are going to be due a little less than a year from now, the state is requiring operators to report monthly scale inventories of their emissions. And so that kind of is going to help us a little bit understand the variability. But to answer the first part of your question, looking at the long-term measurements, we have seen in the Denver-Julesburg Basin, largely a plateau in total emissions within the uncertainties of the platforms. And that is somewhat promising in the sense that production has grown by a factor of 4 since over the last decade in the region.
Thank you. That's helpful. So as you all are collecting high level data and then that more granular data from operators, are we going to be able to use that information to start nibbling more around the edges and figure out where the remaining methane leakage is coming from? So I know that we've been doing trying to do some things on our end with operators. I know you all have been doing a lot of work with your Reg 7 regulations. So what's left? What do we think? Where do we think the biggest emissions are still coming from?
That's hard to answer very clearly. What I can say is that this isn't the entire, what I presented so far is the projects in phase 2 that we have essentially reached a contract on and are, concrete. We know that what we're doing. We are exploring other measurements that will give us site level data, essentially really honing in on operational characteristics, being able to tie specific emission plumes to specific cohorts or classes of facilities or classes in different regions. We're still working on developing such an effort, but we're hoping to be able to get granular enough data to understand where the inventories and the measurements mismatch, right? To find there's always going to be a certain level of mismatch from a stochastic measurement because you have process conditions that can vary on a given day. But when you have a data set that's large enough, what we're hoping is that we have the capacity to understand the mechanistic factors that could be influencing that population of emissions.
Thank you. My last question, and you might not be able to answer it. we've been talking a lot about super emitters. And what could you define what a super emitter means and put some context around, like, what does that equal? What is that like? And then our super emitters, now that we have, okay, I'm going to argue, we have better regulation, better data, we know more about what's happening. Is super emitting happening less as far as like something that wasn't found that's been leaking versus an event like liquid, like unloading or maintenance?
Right. Yeah. So speaking specifically to Colorado, what we can say is, as a function of the flights that have been done by these campaigns that can only see the largest emission sources, we do see less of these very large emission sources. Broadly speaking, the term super emitter was coined by the research industry as, I believe there was a paper that said it was 26 kilograms of methane per hour, but fundamentally the putting a strict number definition on it is not the most helpful. It's essentially a large emission event. They can be persistent, which is the problematic ones, the ones that are unknown and occurring hour after hour, where the accumulated emissions end up being very large, or some of them could be process emissions, like you said, unloadings, blowdowns, swabbing events, those sort of things, where there might be a large emission plume, but it could be lasting for minutes to an hour, right? Whereas that's not as much of a concern as these long-lasting, persistent events. And so that's kind of where the community is, the research community is trying to dive in to understand the mechanistic behavior of these events. And Colorado has made strides with Reg 7 to reduce them, but that's one of the goals of this project is to better understand that component.
Thank you. This is really helpful today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Good questions, Commissioner McGowan. Other commissioners with questions? Also acknowledging that there may be additional AQCC commissioners in the audience. And if you are in the audience and wish to ask a question and be moved up to as a panelist, just raise your hand. Commissioner Reuter.
Thank you, Commissioner Messner, and thanks to the ECMC for letting us join today. This is fascinating research, and I really appreciate Mr. Meal's presentation. I had just, a couple, three, maybe a little bit detailed questions over some of the phase 1 results. On the carbon mapper slide, where you kind of show the summer 2021 and fall 2021 results, how does carbon mapper distinguish between what's oil and gas versus ag? It's interesting that the two numbers, as you show, the oil and gas and ag split varies, but the total for the two is not that different. At 4.69, 5.13 plus or minus. And so I'm just kind of curious to hear a little bit about how carbon mapper distinguishes which methane is oil and gas versus ag. Is it a biogenic thermogenic split, or is it something different?
Absolutely happy to answer that. So with the data that Carbon Mapper has in terms of the plume detections, each individual plume, they can visualize that on a map and essentially see a heat map of methane flux or of methane in the atmosphere. And so their pixel size, I believe, a couple of meters. So they can localize it pretty well. And so they combined that plume data with satellite imagery as well as GIS data on the location of well sites, compressor stations, pipelines, as well as locations of animal feeding operations, landfills, that sort of thing. And so it's a multi-step process to do that attribution. Right now, it is largely manual. There are techniques that these satellites or that these providers are exploring to do machine learning and automated detection, which essentially will be necessary as that we transition from that campaign base to the real-time base. But for right now, everything is manually automated, reviewed. I have actually, in my prior role, done some of attribution for similar types of data. And it's a combination of GIS data and context camera satellite imagery to just look at where is the plume on what facility. In Carbon Mapper's case, they can actually, the the resolution is a little coarse, but they can sometimes identify, is this coming from a compressor, storage tank battery, ECD, but it's not super fine to really understand exactly what type of equipment can be the
Okay,
cause.
but as you had some of the photos, you can see a well site or facility and kind of tell, yeah, that's the oil and gas facility versus a
Right.
CAFO. So, okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's really helpful. My second question on the mass balance campaigns, you know, you noted that October 1st, October 5th stuff was 60% higher. So I'm going, if the average is 25, that means the numbers are like 19 and 31 or something. But I'm also curious on the methane, I'm sorry, on the ethane piece. You know, a lot of the sources we regulate and have regulated over time in Reg 7 through the LDAR programs and everything else should be getting some methane reductions as well as ethane reductions. So if we've seen a big increase in, or a big decrease rather, in ethane, why aren't we seeing at least some measurable decrease in methane? And maybe you answered it with the increase in production, but still the ethane as a constant number has declined markedly. Why haven't we seen that kind of change in the methane? Any ideas?
Well, we're still at the hypothesis stage of it. One thing that we're under, one hypothesis, and I think this comes from Dan Zimmerly at CSU, is that the changes within Reg 7 have changed the operational control. And so the relative balance that the emissions of more unprocessed hydrocarbons, the increased command and control regulations from Reg 7 have reduced that component, but there still is underlying methane leaks at, happening. So it's a matter of where within the system, the natural gas system, the emissions are coming from. And so with the increase in production, we are also seeing a a relative reduction in methane, right? Methane per production increase, but the ethane per production increase largely has been even stronger. And actually, I do have Alan Freed on the line here with me, and he was one of the lead PIs from CU Boulder on that research project. Alan, do you have any more that you can answer to this?
That pretty much explains it. Dan Zimmerly believes that there have been a number of improvements at the wellhead to reduce the delivery pressure, and the gases bifurcate, they split, and he believes that the ethane emissions are reduced, whereas the methane, because of the pressure reduction, we don't see as much reduction. So it's got to do with the delivery pressure at the wellhead is a hypothesis.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting. I look forward to hearing more about that. And the last question on the carbon mapper phase 2 for fall 23, when you're talking about some of those large plumes, I think on the phase 1 carbon mapper, you kind of said 10 to 100 kilogram per hour type things. Is that sort of the detection limit? Is kind of that 10 kilograms per hour, more or less? Oh, you're on mute, Mr. Mule.
Sorry, thank you for that.
No worries.
Under the best atmospheric conditions, they can see down to about 10 kilograms per hour, but realistically, there's interference effects with the instrument. So the detection limit is somewhere in the range of 10 to 100.
Okay.
But that's, largely superemitters. What we're seeing is either a maintenance event that has a large plume associated with it or some sort of abnormal process condition. And that's kind of one of the things that we're really going to be digging into more with this campaign, is following up and trying to ask why, trying to gather information from operators, from our inspectors, to really dig more into the why so we can understand. And then, for these maintenance events, are they quick, right? Because if it's happening for a few minutes, that's not that problematic as compared to something that's continuously happening for hours to days to months.
Sure, absolutely. Awesome. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your presentation. Again, thanks to my colleagues at the ECMC for allowing us to join in.
Thanks for those questions. Super helpful. Other questions from commissioners? Well, Mr. Meal, I don't see any further questions. Really appreciate you coming here today and sharing this information with us. Really impressive, the amount of work that's been done up to this point, and certainly looking forward to some of the studies and work that'll be continuing into the future. Commissioner McGowan.
So sorry, just to, maybe a good way to cap this off is to ask. I feel like you all got some limited funding from the legislature to do this, more studying, data collection. When does that funding run out? And is there any anticipation that you will need or want Martinez-Irwin funds to match? Or is there an anticipation of going back to the legislature and asking for continual funding? And maybe you can't answer that question because it's a legislative kind of strategy, but I am curious to know, is there an end date to this funding and data collection?
Yeah, so what I can say is that Senate Bill 193 has us the funding that we have for a lot of the phase 2 projects is appropriated through the end of June 2025. Hence why that was kind of the termination date on a lot of the studies here. As we continue with the intensity verification rule, we're going to need to continue these sorts of monitoring efforts. So I can't speak to legislative strategy or requests or anything in that regard, but we're learning a lot from these levels of monitoring. And I'm very excited for the next round of data sets and what we're going to gather from it.
Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Meal, and thank you to the Air Quality Control Commission commissioners for joining us here today, and appreciate all the work that you all are doing. I know that you have been busy over the last few months and will continue to be busy moving forward as well. So thanks for being here, and thanks for being patient as we've had technical difficulties this morning, and look forward to seeing you again hopefully soon. So with that, we are going to move on to the beginning of our agenda now. And so the first item on our agenda that we skipped over is commissioner comments. Do any commissioners have comments? I have a couple of comments or suggestions that I'd like to make. One is the first suggestion that I have is understanding that due to some of the deliberation that we had last week around the process for determining demonstrated costs in the financial assurance plans, that we consider setting aside some time at next week's general meeting to perhaps discuss how we should handle review of demonstrated costs and give staff a chance to provide feedback and input on some potential processes on demonstrated costs and financial assurance plans moving forward. And so that's one suggestion that I have. My second suggestion is, I think we've all received comment letters from both the town of Erie and Boulder County regarding Form 2 reviews associated with the Coyote Trails oil and gas location. And so I would suggest that we set aside some time next week at our general meeting to discuss the comments contained in the letter and any deliberation on how the commission would like to proceed on suggestions associated with the letters that we've received from the town of Erie and Boulder County. Do other commissioners have thoughts on those suggestions? Is that something you'd be interested in? Commissioner Ackerman?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I am just in support of your comments there. Thanks.
Okay, so with that, we'll place some time on next week's agenda for those two topics. Any other, or Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my different subject. Tomorrow, we're going to be looking at a request to add an orphan well to the orphan well program. At some point, I would like for the commissioners to also understand what process folks have to go through to add a well to our orphan well program if there is no responsible party. I'm not predetermining or deliberating, but the amount of information that had to get provided and triggered a hearing in front of us seems onerous to me if you are just a regular individual landowner and you run up against an issue with an orphaned well. So at some point, I would like to understand from staff what it takes to what processes are available to folks to to work their way through our system. And if there might be in some cases, simpler, more streamlined ways to go about it.
AAG Davenport.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Commissioner McGowan. I popped up not to suggest anything on the merits of the matter you just discussed, but to suggest that if it's the commission's pleasure, it might be appropriate to wait at least until after the matter tomorrow is heard to have that discussion. And even if it might make sense to give staff a little bit of time to take a look at this. So maybe we have a third, if it's the commission's pleasure, matter to put on the agenda for next week. But recognizing after the conclusion of tomorrow's matter, the commission can certainly, raise concerns or thoughts about that process.
Well, thanks for that, AAG Davenport. Commissioner McGowan, are you comfortable making the suggestion to put it on a future agenda? Either.
Absolutely. I just wanted to put it out there, and I didn't know if we had commissioner comments tomorrow where it would be relevant to the conversation. So I just wanted to put it out there.
Okay. Well, let's put it on a future agenda for discussion then. And I think that's a good topic to learn more about as well. So thanks for bringing that up. If there's no other commissioner comments, we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is staff comments and updates by Deputy Director Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to provide the commission a few updates. I'll start with looking ahead to next week's commission hearing on the 30th. We're going to be having 2 updates provided on rulemakings that are currently in the stakeholdering process. The first one will be on the geothermal rulemaking that we anticipate will be noticed sometime this fall for rulemaking here before the ECMC. And we'll have Mike Rigby provide a brief update as to where we are with that. Then we're also going to be hearing from Jessica Furco from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Jessica will also be providing an update to the commission on the status of the APCD, the Air Pollution Control Division's stakeholdering process on their NOx reduction rulemaking, which is likely going to be occurring later this fall into the winter, December timeframe. And then building upon that, staff at ECMC has prepared a website page on our website, and I'll share my screen here in just a moment, that is meant to provide members of the public with information and updates on the new emerging technologies that ECMC was granted regulatory authority during this last legislative session to regulate. So we were granted the authority to regulate geothermal technologies, CCS, carbon capture and sequestration, and underground natural gas storage. And we recognize that those are, it's a lot of new work for our agency. We're very excited to be undertaking that. And certainly there's likely going to be a lot of questions from members of the public as to where we are with the stakeholdering process, what the timeline looks like for having these rulemakings, et cetera. So we've created a page. If members of the public were to go to our main page at ecmc.state.co.us and then select our hearings tab, and then go all the way over on our blue bar over to upcoming rulemakings, and then select that. And please let me know if you're not seeing the page advance. We've created a page under this upcoming rulemakings tab that again summarizes what the new authority and the technologies related to geothermal, carbon capture and storage, and underground natural gas storage, and also provided a link for members of the public to provide some general feedback to us and also answer some questions related to each of these technologies. We'll be collecting that data for the foreseeable future on these Google Forms. And if members of the public provide their email address in this form, they'll also be added to a list where we will notify them of updates on our stakeholdering and rulemaking process. So just wanted to share that with folks, let you all know that that is out there.
and give you the heads up that next week we'll be learning a little bit more about where we are on geothermal and where the APCD is with their NOx rulemaking.
Great. Thank you for that, Deputy Director Larson. Commissioners, do you have any questions? Great. Thanks for the information. Appreciate it and looking forward to next week. Next on our agenda, we have a consideration of the recommendations associated with the pit emissions working group. For that, I am going to kick it over to you, Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think 3 weeks ago, the commission heard a presentation and was given the draft recommendations from the pit emissions work group. That came out of Senate Bill 181 to kind of confirm what methodologies the commission would accept for emissions estimates from certain kinds of pits. And in those recommendations are other recommendations related to cleanup of our database, for example, and issues around reuse, recycle of water, and kind of handing those gently off to the Produced Water Consortium. So I felt like we probably needed to do something official to approve those recommendations if the commission so pleases. I think that document then would be a good starting point for some guidance to develop guidance from our staff for operators. And then I believe Mr. Duranlo has some ideas about next steps for a work group to start working on the database and updating it, where pits are or are not, and whether or not they're in use or not. So I think I'm looking for a motion.
Great. AAG Davenport, what type of motion would you like on this one?
Well, I'd say Commissioner McGowan, you don't have to look for a motion for another commissioner. If you have, it sounds like you have specific thoughts, and if you'd like to make a motion, you are perfectly free to do that.
All right, so I guess I would like to move the recommendations for approval by the commission, and I think follow up with a work group to start updating and clearing out our pit emissions database.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you, Commissioner McGowan. Next on the agenda is our consent agenda. Do any commissioners have questions about the consent agenda? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Moved.
All those, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Next up, are folks okay with moving right into the next item, or we have a scheduled break at this point? But if we want, we can just roll into the next agenda item. Let's do that. Ms. Amaro, if we could move folks up to the panel for docket number 2212000375, which is a oil and gas development plan by TEP Rocky Mountain LLC. This one specifically is the Ryan Gulch OGDP.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. I think we got everyone live here. Got Adam. All right, great.
But before you start, Mr. Jewell, we're gonna go ahead and swear in any witnesses that you may have as part of the OGDP presentation. AAG Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for everyone on the panel, if I could, I'll go through one by one and ask you to raise your right hand and state that you swear to tell the truth. And is this the same panel that we will have for both dockets? Because then if so, we can swear you in for both at the same time.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. So just a note to the panel that you are being sworn in and swearing to tell the truth as to both of these dockets. So I will start with Mr. Kirtland. Just ask you to raise your right hand, state your name, and that you swear to tell the truth.
Yes, Jeff Kirtland, and I do swear to tell the truth.
Thank you. Mr. Tankersley,
I swear to tell the truth.
and if you could state your name as well.
Adam Tankersley.
Thank you. I don't see any other panelists unless there are any. Consider yourself sworn in.
Okay, Mr. Jewell, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Mercer. Thank you, Chair Messner. Good morning, Commissioners. Michael Jewell of Jewell Jimerson Natural Resources Law on behalf of TEP Rocky Mountain LLC. Proud to be the largest and perhaps the most innovative operator in the Peanuts Basin. We're up to date on our financial assurances, and you know what? It's been a hot minute since last time we appeared before you, so it's great to be back here. It's a welcome sight. Grateful for your time and consideration. As you've already seen, friendly face that you well know, Mr. Jeff Kirtland is with us again, the regulatory manager for TEP. However, also introducing Mr. Adam Tankersley. He is our planning manager for TEP, and we're bringing both of them today because they're kind of our dynamic duo responsible for the plans of development that you see attached to all of our OGDP applications. So I want to make sure we provide you with the deepest dive possible and have both of them with us today. As always, we want to give particular thanks to staff, in this case to Ginger Malachowskis and Stephen Schwartz, who helped shepherd this along. And of course, the rest of the ECMC staff on the technical side and getting this to where it needs to be today. We had one amendment to this application, but as with previous ones, nothing substantial, nothing that changed the operational components, just making sure we are harmonizing with staff and making sure they are precise as possible. So in the application details, this Ryan Gulch Unit Phase 3 OGDP is docket number 221200375. We are in Rio Blanco County. We have two locations associated with this request. The surface locations are in portions of sections 1 and 6 of 2 South 97 West. We formally request you to approve an order pursuant to Rule 303 and 503 G1 for this 792.4 acre oil and gas development plan. It has 17.65 surface acres, and that might seem kind of high, but I want to note a few things. Number one, both of the pads involved currently host wells, and only one of the two will be used for completions for both. So this represents a significant consolidation in line with our goal to choose sites that minimize intrusion, which is really one of our themes here for both of these applications. So a few stats really quickly to drill down a little more there. The first pad, the RGU 236297, 16 of our 34 proposed new wells will be drilled there. The pad is 7.7 acres, but only 2.26 are new. There's less than a half acre of a new pipeline corridor, only 0.08 will be new disturbance. So the grand total is 28.6% of the associated acreage with that pad will be new. So we're proud of that figure being quite low. And it's slightly smaller of a pad than our last OGDP you heard from us about 7 months ago. But again, this is the one that's going to serve as the completion central for both pads in this OGDP. The second pad, the RGU 441298, that one will host 18 wells. It's a 5.63 acre location, only 1.86 of which is new disturbance. We will need a short, about 200-foot extension access road from the main road and 0.19 acres of new pipeline. So this is only 22% of new dirt being turned, proud of that as well. And this pad is some 13% smaller than the last one we brought to you. So overall, we're talking 25% less of new disturbance and making sure we're harmonizing, particularly with CPW, on keeping that trend in place to consolidate and use smaller pads. So I want to give you a few overarching points to this OGDP, both good and bad, and then hand it off to Jeff and Adam for more details. But overall, as stated, this again is an OGDP that's reusing existing well pads. The OGDP implies an expansion of 34 wells. The net gain there in terms of acreage is only 0.11 acres per well. So that's smaller than a residential lot here in Denver. So we think it's a pretty good number. Sparse road development, like I said, about 200 feet. This is a federal application. 100% of the minerals in the surface are federal. So We like this dual oversight because this means significant federal lease stipulations apply governing wildlife and other timing measures. Rights of way analysis and approval for pipelines also goes through BLM. They process their APDs with their own technical staff, and there's an environmental assessment that's in place. Now, none of this at all means that usurps any of the authority you have. Actually, this is independent, but for the public particularly, we want them to know that because we have a supermajority of federal lands, we're always enjoying that second layer of regulation that we make sure is kind of being tossed about with you guys as well, making sure BLM, ECMC, and we are always talking together. There's no proximate governmental authority outside of Rio Blanco County, and a few public health, safety, welfare, and environmental points. One, light and sound. We're continuing our standard practice of minimizing excessive light and sound, and there's some details in the application there I think you'll appreciate, but truth be told, it's similar to our other applications. But we wanted to point out, though, we recognize the remote nature of this location, and it's dark skies with capital letters, right? Dark skies, just like the initiatives that you see with the Forest Service and national parks. And we recognize that that's a resource to our state and to the public at large. So we take that really seriously to make sure we are minimizing our light and sound emissions and pollution, if you will, using the right type of bulbs, the right type of timing and pointing. Secondly, this location has proximity to a publicly maintained road, so less erosion concern, because you've been to some of our sites and you've seen some of the roads to get out there, and we're glad this one has a little less of that impact coming. The reused pads minimize our build out, and we're using dual fuel rigs. And as much as we like to use electric rigs, that's not feasible here because mostly, we'll talk about wildlife, we're about 20 miles away from the nearest juncture, and that 20 miles would go through significant high priority habitat and significant BLM wildlife concerns. And as I'm told, the amount of wattage there probably would exceed the town of Parachute. So, but we're proud that the dual fuel rig is being used because not only is the emissions reduced by tapping that rig to our own natural gas lines, but also we're not running trucks unnecessarily to refuel diesel constantly. Lastly, our water pipelines and recycling. You've heard Jeff on this on many occasions, and I'm sure he'll elaborate more. But we value this conversation and we view this as a conversation. And though it's been a few months as we've been before you, we're tracking what's important to you. And we know this application has a fine point on wildlife. And so we know that's the one I think we will probably want to spend our time on, and for which I will hand off to Jeff and Adam. But I do want you to know that we make sure that we're rule compliant. It wouldn't bring something to you that doesn't have the utmost in planning and making sure we're minimizing and mitigating. So we work really closely with Taylor Elm with CPW to make sure that wildlife is not viewed as a checklist. I'm impressed that TEP is very steady in its consultations with wildlife, and not just when we have an OGDP coming up, and bring BLM into that conversation at all times. But lastly, want you to know that this comes before you with no protest, and that's both formal and informal. We're not getting phone calls here that kind of back channel anything. We've received no concerns on this application, but we will open it up to you for questions after Jeff and Adam and make sure we continue that dialogue. So thank you very much. I will have a concluding remark, but I will hand it off to Mr. Kirtland now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jewell, and good morning, commissioners. Thanks for having us in this morning. It's great to see y'all. I think just to build off of Mr. Jewell's comments with respect to wildlife, I think a couple things I want to impress upon in this application. And again, just a reminder about your awareness of the remoteness of the Peon space, and these two paths, which are fairly close to one another, are effectively kind of right in the middle of BLM federal land. Effectively are right in the middle of HPH, especially with respect to mule deer. And that's true of much of our development area up in this part of the country. And so the necessary or the need rather for us to be very in sync with the experts around wildlife, that being CPW, is critical for our planning. So I'll allow Mr. Tankersley to provide a little more detail around those interactions, but want to just impress upon you the importance in just even when we think about a new project, you effectively can't find a location, whether it's existing or a new location in our development area, that does not have some level of impact on wildlife. And so the critical nature at which we meet with CPW and engage with them very early in our planning process is critical, not only for our development, but especially for how we mitigate and protect and avoid wildlife. So with that, I'll ask Mr. Tankersley to provide a little more detail. And the reason we're doing that is I think we've appeared for you before and sort of talked generally about wildlife, but want to provide a little more information about how we engage with CPW in these projects, and hopefully answer some additional questions that you might have with respect to that conversation. So with that, I'll ask Mr. Tankersley to walk us through a bit of that with respect to our schedule and how we interact with CPW.
Thank you, Mr. Kirtland, and thank you to the commission for giving us your time this morning. TEP goes through a pretty detailed planning process. At the very early stages of that process, we engage with CPW to review any potential development plans for new pad locations, new wells, pipeline corridors, those sorts of things. The consultation is really important to us. We want to ensure that we're minimizing or mitigating our impacts to wildlife. Our basin or our development area has a wide swath of high priority habitat, different wildlife species, and we understand that that's important to the state to preserve and to us as well. As part of this application specifically, we met with CPW multiple times, conducted 2 formal consultation meetings with them. One was at an on-site, as well as a follow-up meeting to review the drafted waste management plan at the time, or sorry, wildlife mitigation plan at the time. So we definitely engage with them on a regular basis to ensure that the application is sufficient and provides protections for wildlife. For both of these pads, we are in high priority habitat for sportfish management waters, as well as mule deer winter concentration and severe winter range. Like I mentioned, we want to first avoid, in this case, we are unable to avoid impacts to these habitat types because of the vast swath of country in this area that is considered mule deer habitat. And then, past that, we want to minimize, so minimizing our total disturbance or footprint, making sure that, we're not taking more ground that we need to. And then thirdly, mitigating any additional impacts, through compensatory mitigation or implementation of best management practices, that sort of thing. So there are 4 waivers that we requested from CPW. The primary one was the alternative location analysis waiver. We did go through a review process with them on alternatives to just reassure them that we have kind of identified the best possible location. And based on those discussions, it was clear that the existing location was the preferred option. All the alternatives would have created more impacts to mule deer habitat unnecessarily through additional pad construction or road improvements, pipelines, that sort of thing. So, that was really key to approval of the ALA waiver there. In addition to that, there were 3 others under Rule 1202A3 for chemical storage, given the proximity to Ryan Gulch. we needed a waiver for that location or from that role. We implemented some BMPs there to ensure that we're minimizing our storage on location and maximizing the distance, as well as including some control measures such as containments, that sort of thing, to ensure that there wouldn't be any impacts there. Under Rule 1202A 10C, that's due to the fact that the pads within sport fish management waters, we're required to conduct daily inspections. But following the consultation process with CPW, we determined that after about 6 months, we could kind of reduce that down to a weekly inspection that would minimize impacts to mule deer in the area for long-term development. We were also asking for a waiver to the Rule 1202C1S, which is for relocating or drilling new wells on a pad that's inside the sport fish management waters NSO. And with that, there's under Rule 309E5DII, there's BMPs there that we're implementing to minimize the impacts to sport fish management waters as well. So furthermore, for mule deer specifically, we're going to be implementing compensatory mitigation as part of this project that's detailed in the wildlife mitigation plan. We're also going to be implementing revegetation and weed management plans appropriate for mule deer habitat as discussed with CPW. With that, I'll hand it over to Jeff.
Thank you, Adam. The other thing I think it's important to note is that the schedule will be changing slightly as opposed to what was in the application. So there, I think our intent originally was to construct these pads beginning in September of this year. We're actually, based on the time involved in the review of this and we anticipate in terms of our rig schedule. So we would actually look at scheduling construction really for the one pad in August of 2025, and then another one in May of 2025. So I got those to flip, but drilling then would proceed in October 25 through March 26 for the RGU 23-6 297 pad, and then would begin in March 26 through September of 26 for the RGU 44-1 298 pad. And then following those schedules of drilling, we will be doing simultaneous operation, which is simultaneously drilling and completing wells at the same time. So that would continue during drilling and then through the months of May of 26 and November of 26 for each of those pads. And then we'd reclaim those pads. The first one, RGU 23-6 in September of 2026, and then the RGU 44-1 after the winter, so avoiding that timing limitation in May of 2027. And the reason that schedule, I just wanted to walk through that is there is a bit of a delay based on what we had originally included. It is a more favorable schedule. I think our most recent discussions with Taylor Ellen and CPW confirmed that this is a better schedule for avoidance and mitigation for wildlife. So, but again, just in terms of that ongoing discussion with CPW, that is something that occurs on a almost weekly basis to some extent on our projects, and especially with this application, we're sensitive to where we're developing and the impacts that wildlife that we're sharing with wildlife in that respect. And I guess I'll leave it at that and ask if you have any questions generally, or Mr. Jewell, I don't know if you had any parting thoughts before we ask for questions.
Just wanted to conclude real quickly. Just as far as the planning process that Terra takes on and why we have both Jeff and Adam here. So this application was submitted after about a 40% decline of the 2022 high price for natural gas. This has nothing to do with economics per se. That's not to be taken into your considerations, other than to suggest that we know the economics go up and down. We know that there's a transition in the way we view and acquire energy, and we're proud to be a part of that in making sure that we're providing that foundation of clean energy in that interim. And prices still are about half of that low point from when we submitted this application, but still, you'll note no substantive changes. We really pride ourselves on making sure the application is clean, the plan of development is detailed. So with that, thank you very much for your time, consideration. As always, we welcome your questions and further the conversation to these comments. Thank you.
Thank you all for the presentation on your application. This is opportunity for commissioners to ask questions. Commissioners, do you have questions for the applicant? Commissioner Cross?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kirtland, could you please just go over the dates on the scheduling change there again? I believe for the first pad, you said August 25 for the construction.
Yeah, certainly. I'll start with the RGU 236297 pad. Our construction plan is for May of 2025. Then we would be drilling October 2025 through March 2026. And completions would begin December 25. So, within that same drilling period through May of 2026, with reclamation starting soon after in September of 26. For the RGU 44-1, construction is scheduled, at least at this point, for August 2025. Drilling would begin March 2026 through September of 26. Completions begins in May of 26 through November. And then reclamation would then commence after the winter in May of 27.
And I'll let some other commissioners ask questions. I just wanted to make sure that I got that down first.
Other commissioner questions? Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for being here today and presenting. I appreciate the way TEP thinks about things, and per usual, it always kind of feels a little complicated to me. So if I'm understanding this application correctly, we have two sites that have existing wells. We're coming in and putting more wells in. So my first question was, why the coming back? Why weren't these wells all drilled in the first place? If you could talk about that a little bit.
Certainly. Thank you, Commissioner McGowan, for that question. I think in some cases we've seen technology changes. These pads, and I don't have the date right off the top of my head, but were drilled by a prior operator. They were drilled based on a certain spacing at the time. Technology and drilling has allowed us to exceed that limit and drill more wells. And there are leases here that have not been developed that we can reach effectively. So that's effectively why we're interested in these locations. Again, the technology allows us to drill out further so we can reach from these pads. And when we contemplate that in our development planning, and thank you for the compliment, we are always trying to understand what will be the least impact. So that's why you're seeing us oftentimes going back to existing pads where we can now, through improved technology, reach new bottom holes that are further and do that from an existing location where we have existing infrastructure, tie-ins to gas pipelines, tie-ins to water pipelines that allow us to recycle and produce water in a more effective and efficient way. So hopefully that gets to the answer of your question. The big takeaway there is just the advancement in technology and being able to reach these minerals.
Thank you. And that's actually a really great segue into my next question, which was the other thing that I appreciate about TEP's applications in general are the piping of your hydrocarbon and your produced water. And in this case, that third site, which is, I think, kind of a staging area for the fracking and completions, then gets reclaimed, I think, back to its original size. It is unclear to me which sites are now going to be able to use pipeline for produced water and which are having to use tanks, because you have a significant number of tanks in the application. And typically I see from you all piping to your one of your centralized management facilities. And so I'm wondering if you can walk through that a little bit and explain whether or not you are putting the produced water in tanks or whether or not it's being piped.
Thank you for the question, Commissioner McGowan. So the answer is both. We have to install tanks typically on our locations as a way to manage the volume that's produced from those wells. And then through management of multiple locations throughout the basin that are interconnected, we can sort of turn valves on and off to manage that volume coming into the system to then be sent to our centralized waste management facilities, where that water would then be processed and then recycled back for a future development. But tanks are necessary, and I think we've talked about this in the past, and tanks are necessary as a way to sort of hold that water, to stage it in a way to ensure that we can move water consistently and effectively around this area. And so that's hopefully that sort of gets to what you're asking. We could certainly go into much more detail about.
I keep wanting you to reduce the number of tanks, and I know every time I'm always like, why do you have these tanks? And so I keep asking because I know that you are piping it, which I appreciate, but that's just another opportunity then for a spill to happen, right? Or release. Sure. So I appreciate that it's being piped, but even though we have tanks, that is not increasing truck traffic. You're not picking it up via truck. It's in the tank and then being piped.
Correct. And that's been the method that we've tried to employ throughout the Piance in our operations for many years, especially because of the remoteness. We don't want trucks moving from location to location in some of these areas. The winters here can be fairly harsh. So the tanks are necessary for a couple of reasons. One, these wells, these Williams Fork wells do produce quite a bit of water. Tanks are necessary in how the Piance produces its gas wells here. So with that, our goal is always to ensure that we can connect those tanks, those centralized tank batteries or tanks on a location to our facility, which is growing. We're trying to expand that facility and provide us with some flexibility to move water between our different areas so that we can more effectively recycle and manage produced water. And that's something we're always excited to talk about and provide additional information.
Thank you. And then Mr. Kirkline, I know you and I have talked about this, and whether or not there's a possibility that TEP would consider some sort of a umbrella plan to submit to the commission. And maybe we wouldn't call it a cap because you and I talked about the difficulties of TEP being able to do that. All these pieces always seem to kind of fit together, and it might benefit, I think, the commission and our staff to kind of know what the overall picture is going out, I don't know, a couple of years or whatever, so we can see how all these pieces fit together. So just, certainly, I'll put that little nibble out there again. I think it could be valuable for everyone.
No, I appreciate that comment, and certainly would love to follow up. In many ways, because this is federal land, we meet with BLM and discuss just that, sort of what our future outlook is. So, as it relates to the submittal of an application, again, we feel an OGDP with multiple paths, meets the timing needs that we're enjoying, from that process to some extent. But I'm happy to sit down and talk about sort of the outlook if it's reasonable.
Thank you for that. Other commissioners with questions? Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation today. I wanted to also say thank you for the consideration of and use of dual fuel rigs. I think that's a great approach out there and really appreciate your commitment to doing that. You know, Commissioner McGowan went down the primary road that I wanted to go down, but I did want to kind of elaborate on that just a little bit. So that there's a facility across the road, across Ryan Gulch Road from your upper, I think it's the 298 pad. Is that your facility there?
Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman. I believe you're referring to our GU 44-1 pad, and right across that County Road 24. I believe that's a Williams compressor station.
Okay, thank you. So I'm trying to figure out, when you mentioned the centralized waste facility, I'm trying to figure out where that is. So if you'll give me some remedial information there, I'd really appreciate it. Where is that actually piped to? I'm trying to understand if it's piped nearby then trucked, or if it is piped all the way down, you know, to Parachute Creek, or where that goes.
Thank you for that question. And I might ask Adam to help me out on this, but I'll try to answer the question first. So we've got a couple of different facilities up in Ryan Gulch in this area, with our primary one being Mott's Ranch, which is a centralized E&P facility. And the pipelines that are connected to the majority of these pads ultimately are connecting to that Mott's Ranch. And I don't necessarily have my bearings, but I believe Mott's Ranch is to the west of this location, where you know, the majority of our Ryan Gulch area terminates for processing of that water. So you know, to your question about trucking, we're not trucking a lot of these newer pads that are connected to our water infrastructure up there, trucking those to our centralized waste management facilities. And at this point, we're piping the majority of the water up in Ryan Gulch to that facility. We do have a future facility that we're still working through final permitting with CDPHE. It's a facility that you all had approved last year, called the Pitcher's Mound Centralized E&P Waste Management Facility. That will be, I believe, more north and to the east, and eventually we'll tie sort of a full system that can move water between the field to manage and recycle.
Thank you, Mr. Kirtland. Appreciate that elaboration. So once it reaches that destination waste facility, it's treated, recycled there, and then hopefully used for future projects, or is it further disposed of via truck from that facility somewhere else?
Our hope is that well, thank you for the question, Commissioner. Most of that water would be treated and then is available for recycling. Much of that activity is based on when we're completing wells. So, you know, currently, we're completing wells. And so a lot of the water that we're producing is being recycled for that purpose. Any water that isn't being recycled would ultimately be injected into injection wells that we have throughout the field. It's rare, we always try to avoid using trucks to transport water out of the basin to commercial facilities. We like to sort of manage our water to its termination and its final destination, whether we're continually recycling or injecting that into our injection wells. And I think we actually just brought on a recent injection well in this area that we're excited about.
Thanks, Mr. Kirtland. Appreciate the, again, further elaboration and one more kind of extension of that. So when you do dispose during the into the injection wells, is that moved through pipeline, or is that moved through truck?
Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman. Yes, that would be moved through pipe as well. You know, the sophistication of how we've designed our water management systems is essentially wells are piped to tanks that are piped to our facilities for management, and that's potentially a two-way process for recycling. But then our injection wells are piped from those centralized facilities for disposal.
Got it. Thank you. And wanted to say thank you for your responsible reuse of water and for your responsible pipeline transportation system. Very grateful for your approach there.
Thank you.
And thank you also again for your coordination with CPW. I did have questions about the coordination of the timeline changes with CPW. It sounds like that coordination has taken place. Finally, with regard to compensatory mitigation, this is kind of more of a statement for confirmation here. I didn't see it in the presentation, but compensatory mitigation because of the HPH and the disturbance in HPH is taking place on this project. My understanding is that you paid the direct compensatory mitigation, the indirect compensatory mitigation, and then there was an additional indirect compensatory mitigation due to working through the time enclosure. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I'll actually ask Mr. Tankersley to expand on that, provide a little more clarification.
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Ackerman. Yeah, what we landed on, obviously the direct impact fee and the indirect impact fee, and then due to the potential for winter operations per our schedule, there was a need to kind of add some additional mitigation there for those activities. Given the fact that we're drilling a fairly large number of wells on these pads, and the duration it takes to drill those wells, it's very unlikely that we'd be able to avoid that winter season. So that's why we included that in the application.
Thank you, Mr. Tankersley. And you got to my follow-up point there, which was due to the number of wells that you're drilling here, your two choices, as I understand it, were either continuous operation into the winter period through the time enclosure compensatory mitigation relief, or multiple occupations outside of the closure periods in order to drill. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chair, no further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman. Additional questions from commissioners? Commissioner Cross?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I wanted to touch on, as we talked about some of the waste facility discussions there with respect to produced water, I wanted to touch a little bit on the cuttings that you are doing here. You talked about non-line trench cuttings where you're hoping to keep it on the site there. And I recognize that there's obviously some soil differences in the west slope as compared to what we see here in the eastern part of the state. And so I was hoping to just get some more clarity on what you're doing with the cuttings here, because a lot of times in the DJ, for example, we see cuttings being just trucked off. And so if you could go into that a little bit.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Cross. I'll ask Adam to help a little on this from a planning perspective. But I think it's important to note that there's a very different type of process between what the DJ operators are doing, which are drilling for oil, and typically using an oil-based mud, and obviously extracting cuttings that are in contact with a very heavy hydrocarbon, whereas in the West Slope, peons particularly, we're using a bentonite-based non-hydrocarbon type of cutting, mud rather, and so from that we get a very relatively low level of hydrocarbons as compared to the Front Range. And so our process historically has been to be able to treat those cuttings once they come up through the wellbore, and we have shakers that remove the liquids and the solids. We can treat those cuttings by removing liquid. The hydrocarbons are already beginning their process of being removed. And then as those cuttings are dried, we can further treat those cuttings on location in a compacted on location trench, where they can essentially meet the 915 standards that are required for final burial and final remediation. So that's it kind of in a nutshell how we've been able to do that here in the peons. I don't know, Mr. Tankersley, if you have anything to add in terms of our process.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is, once cuttings have been moved into the cuttings trench, they're obviously mixed, tested, sampled for compliance with the 915.1 standards. And then they'll be placed back, into the cuttings trench, as well as up against the cut slope for final burial at reclamation. We won't have any cuttings at the surface. We'll have a 3-foot minimum cap over top of those, so they won't be exposed to the surface or mixed in with any topsoil or surface materials.
I appreciate that. And one of the things that kind of stuck out to me here is the fact that there are some conditions of approval specifically tied to the testing of the cuttings here. And so I was curious as to whether throughout the process of the application, if you were trying to propose different types of testing for the cuttings, or what kind of led to the condition of approval. And relatedly, do you have any concerns with the condition of approval?
Thank you, Commissioner Cross. And Ed, I might ask you to weigh in on this, but I believe the condition of approval, I think, is a more consistent approach to what COG ECMC almost did it. Sorry, is looking for with respect to our process. It's not very far off from what we were proposing. I believe it was more of a clarification that our OGLIS were looking for relative to how we are treating cuttings. So from our perspective, that's very easy to manage and comply with the COA. Mr. Dickersley, I don't know if you had any additional comments.
I think you covered it pretty well. I think the COA just provides some consistency between, what's in our plan of development, as well as what staff wants to see from a sampling perspective. So that's all I would add there.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I have no further questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Cross. Any other questions from commissioners? Okay, at this point, we will step away from the questions and from the presentation and deliberate amongst the commissioners. Does any commissioner wish to start deliberations on the application? Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks again for TEP for being here. I had also multiple discussions with Taylor Elm from CPW about this pad and the one that we're hearing later today, and would confirm that I believe there was appropriate and good communication on this development with CPW. As I pointed out, and TEP, Mr. Tankersley confirmed, the choice here really was to either encroach on the winter periods in this wide swath of habitat, you couldn't move these pads, or to have multiple occupations due to the timing of operations. I had significant discussions with Mr. Elm about that, and concur with his assessment that, given that choice, moving on a continuous method of operation into the winter season, so you're not, disturbing animals once they've already settled, is the best approach if you're going to work through the winter season. I also agree that the best approach is continuous operations rather than multiple occupations. And would concur with, again, the information given to me by Mr. Elm that really one season's worth of higher intensity activity is probably the better approach on these pads. Largely that's because these pads are right along the county road. Again, appreciate TEP working from existing pads and working right along the county road. That's a county road that is accessed by other businesses, by other oil and gas operators, by the soda plant, I know goes up there with some degree of frequency. So there is somewhat significant existing disturbance throughout the year on this road. I also understand that TEP will have to submit, as they pointed out, requests to BLM also for timing relief. And so BLM gets to take a look at that as well, and appreciate that dual authority and opportunity to look at that. I think that helps reduce the overall impact as the federal government looks at it as well. I very much appreciate the wildlife measures that have been taken. I always look at wildlife activities as concerns oil and gas development on the western slope with a pretty scrutinous eye, particularly in the Piceance. While there's a lot of oil and gas development in the Piceance, arguably the Piceance is the breadbasket of mule deer production, certainly on the western slope, but maybe in Colorado in general, and appreciate the measures that are being taken here. I think the appropriate measures have been proposed by TEP with regard to wildlife. And in my opinion, this development is a good candidate for the waivers that have been requested, as well as for the compensatory mitigation program. I also wanted to once again recognize the dual fuel approach there. That certainly was high on my questions here. I know we've had lots of questions about the types of engines for drilling. And TEP has enough business wherewithal to be able to plan for dual fuel engines for drilling. And I wanted to say how much I appreciate that approach and hope that you continue to innovate along those lines with regards to the types of engines that are used for drilling as well as completions operations. And then I believe this development has responsible water transportation systems as well as responsible treatment, reuse, and disposal processes. So, Mr. Chair, I will be in favor of this application and appreciate the discussion here today.
Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman. Other commissioners with thoughts or perhaps a motion? Commissioner Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I concur with what Commissioner Ackerman said. I think that there's a lot of good things about this application, particularly the reuse of existing facilities to minimize and mitigate impacts, the piping, the recycling of water, as Commissioner Ackerman detailed, the treatment of wildlife, and working with CPW to do so. So I am also in favor of this, and based on that, I would move for approval of the application.
Second.
So we have a motion by Commissioner Cross, a second by Commissioner McGowan. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries, and Ryan Gulch OGDP is approved. Thank you all for presenting. I know that you're here for the next OGDP as well. I would suggest we take a 5-minute break, return at 11:45 and continue through the next OGDP. I know that we had a lunch break scheduled, but it seems like it's plausible for us to get this OGDP application reviewed prior to lunch, unless anyone has any concerns about that. Okay, we'll see everyone at 11:45. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started then with docket number 2209-00247, which is the ARCO Deep OGDP by TEP Rocky Mountain LLC. With that, Mr. Jewell, I will hand it off to you, understanding that all the witnesses have already been sworn in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again for hearing us for the second time this morning. For the record, and I will try to keep everything as brief as possible from here, avoiding any duplication, but Michael Jewell with Jewell Jimerson Natural Resources Law here on behalf of TEP Rocky Mountain LLC, proud to be the largest and hopefully most innovative operator in the Piceance Basin, up to date on our financial assurances. Here now with, at last count, our 8th OGDP before you. So not just 8, which we're glad to see have come through, but probably the more or most diverse even in the state. We had operational OGDPs that you just heard, non-operational, if you will, like disposal wells and our water recycling programs. So thank you for traveling with us, if you will, through this whole process the past couple of years. Again, we'll have Mr. Jeff Kirtland, Regulatory Manager, Adam Tinkersley as the Planning Manager, proudly our duo that puts together our plans of development that we'll scrutinize here. This time, staff thank yous again, Ginger Malashowskis, Stephen Schwartz, but particularly Laurel Faber and John Noto on the OGLA side. Lots of great insight and some partnership there that we want to recognize. Our single amendment in this application was merely cinching down specificity on the surface land description. No substantive changes were made after submission. So again, for the record, this is the ARCO D127 OGDP docket number 2209-00247, located in Garfield County, about 20 miles away from where we were in our last OGDP application. It consists of one producing and one remote frac location. We formally request you to approve this pursuant to Rule 303 and Rule 503G1 for an approximately 210 acre OGDP, which includes another seemingly big number. 16.8 of that is surface acres, but that strikes us high. But note that both these pads have had activity. The producing one, the ARCO D, has been around since 1985. And the second one, the MV-123, will merely serve as a frac location. It will be completely reclaimed once those drilling operations have ceased. The Arco Deep will have 2.21 new acreage, and that is only access road. The pad itself remains in place, 4.3 acres. That's been around since almost 40 years now. So it's only 34% that's new, 65% that's existing, roughly identical to our previous OGDP in size. But interim reclamation will bring this down to 1.26 acres. So considering this is 16 new wells, we're back again to about 0.13 per well. So proud of that figure. The MV-123 is 1.87 acres. That's a remote frac location and will be completely reclaimed once operations have ceased. So overall, we're continuing our commitment to reuse and minimize surface impacts, trending toward consolidation and smaller pads. So my few overarching comments here is that this acreage here is not federal like RGU3, but the spirit of development continues. Incidentally, much of our planning already follows what adjacent BLM leases and their lease stipulations would provide for. So there's not dual authority here. However, it just kind of makes you smile a bit, just the way that it all happens with our acreage being surrounded by a larger federal body. That's how things kind of end up going. No proximate government authority outside of Garfield County. And public health and safety notes, again, light and sound. This also is a dark sky country, but even a little bit more so than the RGU that you just looked at. This is on a ridge, so that idea of light and sound mitigation is a little more important, but we have everything in place to make sure that not only are we following the rules here, but also preserving that idea of the dark sky. The nearest RBU is over a mile away. Pipelines for all produce water and gas. We're using freshwater-based muds in our closed loop system, as you're aware. And lastly, reuse pads and minimizing impacts through the dual fuel rig system. So once again, for everyone listening, that's important, not only that we can hook up the rig directly to our gas that's being produced, so minimize the amount of diesel, but also just a lot of truck and particulate traffic that is getting reduced from a typical diesel type unit. And again, we're probably at least 20 miles away from electric connectivity, even if the grid could support it. So as suggested before, and as we believe as an operator, any new technology that will continue to improve upon that, we will welcome. But for today, we believe that's the best shot we have. Now, it's not all wonderful all the time. We recognize the issue here again is wildlife, but I believe you will agree the team has put together a good plan and keeps those conversation lines very clear with CPW and BLM, but we will address those with Mr. Kirtland and Mr. Tankersley here shortly. But overall, bottom line, we would bring it to you only if we thought it was 100% compliant. And this comes to you with no protest, either formal or any back channel informal complaints or questions that you would need to know about. So with that, I'll pass it along to Mr. Kirtland, and I will have a closing remark and enter into your deliberations from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joel, and again, thank you, commissioners, for your time today, and appreciate staff's thoughtfulness to schedule two OGDPs back to back that we could present to you. Again, this one really centers around wildlife, as we just discussed in a prior GDP application, and as I sort of laid out earlier, I want to just sort of give you a sense of where this pad is located, what's sort of surrounding it, and what's significant. You know, in essence, this pad is up on top of a ridge. It's sort of on an island in this development area. There's ridges and canyons that separate not only you know, this pad from other existing pads, but from you know, impacts to you know, different receptors throughout the area. And so with that, you know, the need to really consult with CPW, as we've said before, is very important, because we realize that there's lots of sensitive species up here, and want to ensure that we're being responsible, particularly when it comes to our proximity to sage grouse habitat. So given that's a big topic related to this project, again, wanted to invite Mr. Tankersley to give an overview of what those discussions with CPW were, what those discussions were, and sort of where we landed in seeking their expertise and guidance related to this development. So I'll ask Mr. Tankersley to take over at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Kirtland, and thanks to the commission for hearing this application today. As mentioned previously, we consult with CPW on most locations due to the fact that we're primarily operating in high priority habitat, and their feedback is critical to ensuring that our development plans provide protections for wildlife. For this application specifically, we consulted with CPW in August of 2022. That was a review of the development plan, which included the expansion or reoccupation of the Arco Deep 127 pad, the slight adjustments and upgrades to the existing access road to maintain appropriate grades in the location there, as well as pipeline right away for gas and water lines so that we can effectively produce and operate the wells. The pad location itself is situated inside of sage grouse general habitat, as well as the road modifications that we plan on doing. The majority of the pipeline is also located within general habitat for sage grouse. There is a small portion of the right of way, approximately 290 feet, that is located inside priority habitat. So consultation with CPW was obviously required and necessary to ensure that we get the best feedback from them and can develop this plan effectively for protections to sage grouse. The pad location specifically is located 5.3 miles from the nearest active elect site. So we've got significant distance between our activities at the well pad and the nearest active elect site. And there's significant topographic changes. There's ridge lines and valleys between the pad location and that active elect site that really provide a buffer from any activities there. So as part of this application, as part of the consultation process with CPW, we did take a look at alternative locations. It was pretty apparent up front that the pad location, the Arco Deep 127 pad, would be preferred because it's existing. But we did take a look at one other existing pad that is technically operated by another operator, as well as other new locations that could be utilized for development of these wells. From that process, CPW agreed that utilization of the existing pad is the most preferred. Any alternative would either add more impacts to sage grouse habitat through new surface disturbance, or would get us closer to an active elect site. So that's a benefit here for this location, utilizing the existing pad as much as possible. The pipeline itself, there's a cross-country section of the pipeline. About, I would say, half of the pipeline is cross-country and crosses through that little section of priority habitat. As part of that, we've agreed to avoid construction of the cross-country component of that until before or after the time limitation, which runs from March through I think middle of July. So we've included that in our application just to ensure that there's no impacts there. From a construction standpoint for the pad, we intend to start construction of that here in the next few weeks, assuming we receive approval. And our intent is to hopefully get the pad built out, as well as the road modifications and a good portion of the pipeline constructed before winter. In the off chance that we are unable to do that, We would restart, pad construction activities in May after the primary lecking season, which is March and April, to avoid impacts there, and continue pad construction activities, through the summer as needed. And like I said earlier, from the pipeline standpoint, if we don't get the full scope of that construction job completed, we wouldn't restart that until July of next year. And from a drilling perspective, we are on schedule for drilling in August of next year. Given the fact that this location does not support SIMOPS, we do have the option to complete construction of the pipeline in fall of next year without any issues to drilling or completions operations. As far as waivers are concerned, we went through the ALA waiver process with CPW. They obviously approved that, and we also had one other waiver, which was the for Rule 1202A3, which is for chemical storage. There's a intermittent drainage that's located within 500 feet of the pad location. It's a dry drainage. It only really sees any flow during large storm events or during snow runoff season. So they approved that for us. And from a BMP standpoint, I think we covered the pipeline timing restrictions for construction, as well as pad construction, avoiding the lecking season. We're also going to be using CPW approved seed mix, as well as implementing a best management practice for weed management to ensure that those bases are covered as well. So with that, I'll hand it back to Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Tankersley. And again, just to impress upon the sensitivity and the importance of working with CPW to manage our impacts related to sage grouse. This is an area that obviously has some development already there. Although the habitat does change a bit from year to year, so we want to ensure that we have a full understanding of that and defer to the expertise of CPW to help guide our planning process. And I will add, this is a project that we've actually been contemplating now for probably 3 or 4 years. And again, due to our ability to reach further on our bottom holes, this became a location that made sense from that perspective. And so as we began to engage again on our ability to plan this location, really felt that CPW is a partner and necessary in ensuring that our development planning is meeting the regulations and certainly meeting our obligation to wildlife. We live out there with our folks are out there, and wildlife is a part of our communities. So we want to be very sensitive to that. Additionally, just sort of taking cues from additional questions that were asked earlier, we will be recycling water. The location of our frac pad related to this will be running lines that will be connected to what is one of our major pipelines that connects our water infrastructure in the valley up County Road 215 near Parachute up to our development area up sort of in this area, the Trail Ridge area, which is north and to the west. So we'll utilize that ability to recycle treated water. Additionally, the production will be managed in a way that we're able to pull that water off that location without trucking. This is in an area that over the wintertime can be pretty brutal. So we want to try to avoid the trucking that's associated with water takeaway, as well as just overall production and maintenance of these wells. So again, just to impress upon you that CPW is so critical in our planning and understanding these sensitive species and ensuring that we're doing the right thing with regard to our development plans. I will mention that the schedule that Mr. Tankersley just went through is a little different than what was in the original application. However, again, I think based on our commitments to avoid construction during the liking season and avoid the timing relative to, again, we're 5.3 miles away, but I want to be very sensitive to the timing of our operations. But I think through discussions with CPW, this is a better schedule for managing our ability to be protective of sage grouse and any kind of impact that might be there. With that, I don't have any further comments. I certainly will turn it over to Mr. Jewell again. Thank you, commissioners. Look forward to your questions.
Mr. Jewell, you're muted.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that. Just to wrap up, again, similarly to our last application on timing and looking at the long view of things, economics plays a minimal role in terms of understanding our topography and the environment which we're working in. So thank you for appreciating, considering that. Also, we look forward to the cumulative impacts discussions that are forthcoming. Just like in epidemiological analyses, I think we're all much more familiar with these days. Cumulative detriments and cumulative benefits. It's not really a balance, but there's a line of intersection where the best outlook for regulation can be found. And I think some natural gas development projects like these will be a good contributing part of that conversation. So we look forward to that time. But as to this application, thank you again for your constant consideration of this 8th OGDP, and I will rest and defer. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your presentation. Commissioners, does anyone have questions? Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks again to TEP for their presentation. Again, as I noted during the last OGDP that we considered, I had significant discussion with Taylor Elm from CPW, their Northwest Energy Specialist, about a number of points on this application and a few discrepancies that I saw in the materials, some of which were addressed in the presentation today, but do want to ask for a few clarifications. First, I wanted to ask a little bit about the pad location. I understand that you had that conversation with CPW. This pad location is really difficult and problematic because it's on a peninsula on top of the Roan Plateau, standing alone off of a spur road, really with no significant disturbance other than this development. Even though I recognize that it's an existing pad, it just has one relatively aged well on there. So I recognize the waivers that you received on the ALA, and so I'm not asking for reconsideration. I just would like a little more clarification. My understanding is that from the nearby pad to the northeast, I'm not clear if that's the one that's being used for fracking or if it's the one that belongs to another operator. Can you go into a little more detail on why the appropriate hydrocarbons wouldn't be able to be reached from that nearby pad, thus kind of ending the disturbance there and leaving the peninsula alone a little bit?
Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman, for the question. I'm actually going to defer to Mr. Tankersley on this. I know there were some discussions that he alluded to with respect to reviewing alternative locations, and I think it came down to, again, the reach of wells that had not been developed, and so I think in one way those pads to the north were potential pads, but the full ability to reach the number of wells that we are anticipating would have been diminished. So from that perspective, another way to state it is going north means we have less wells, whereas in this location we're able to reach the maximum number of bottom holes that we are targeting. Mr. Tankersley, I don't know if you have any additional comments.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question, Commissioner Ackerman. The only thing that I would add is that existing pad is a pad owned by another operator that's been fully reclaimed at this point. There's no existing wells or any other infrastructure on that site, and it's located a little over a half a mile, maybe 3/4 of a mile to the north of this Arco Deep 127 pad. So to Jeff's point, or Mr. Kirtland's point, we would be reducing the number of wells that we can develop in this area significantly. We wouldn't be able to reach the wells to the south side of the Arco Deep 127 pad.
Thanks for the clarification there. And you touched on the schedule as well. The proposed schedule doesn't match the wildlife plan. And the wildlife plan states any changes to the proposed schedule would be communicated to CPW well in advance of the proposed operations. And so can you elaborate a little bit more as the schedule morphed on your communications with CPW and their thoughts as they were given to you with regard to the schedule change?
Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman. And again, I'll defer to Mr. Tankersley, who had that discussion with Taylor.
Yes, we did communicate the updated schedule to CPW, and we will obviously be keeping them up to date with any scheduling changes going forward. We meet with them pretty regularly, at least quarterly, if not more often. We're in contact with them on a weekly basis on other matters as well, but we meet with them on the schedule about quarterly. So,
thank you. And did they give specific thoughts on the changes to the schedule here?
Yeah, they did. Obviously, they wanted to reiterate the desire to not conduct construction activities during the lecking period, March and April, and then for construction of the pipeline through that cross-country section. They don't want those activities to occur during the full breadth of the TL, which we've accommodated as part of this updated schedule. We're not going to have any activities during those periods of time. The one thing that we did clarify with them is, that our drilling and completions activities will run into March. And our previous schedule had us running through April of 2024. So we're basically going to be getting out of that area about a month earlier with the schedule. So it's a little bit of a better schedule overall for Sage-Grouse.
Thanks, Mr. Tankersley. And you kind of touched on my next point there, which is, as I understand it then, as you presented, there will be no activities during March and April, whether it's during drilling or completion or pad construction. You won't have any activities during March and April. And that includes pipeline construction. And then with that small section that runs through the priority habitat management area, that would be the full sage-grouse lecking, nesting, and rearing closure of March through July 15th. Am I correctly reiterating that?
The only change there would be for completions operations, which would run into March of 2025.
As you described, thank you. And then I think that addresses my pipeline construction clarification. I didn't see some of these things reflected in the application itself. So for example, I don't, and maybe I didn't gather it well enough, but I didn't see the commitment to not have those activities at all in March and April. Did I miss that? Is that in the application, Mr. Tankersley?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Ackerman. That was in the wildlife protection plan. It was listed as a BMP at the very end of that document.
Thanks, and that's why I asked, because in the wildlife protection plan, it says construction activities associated with the cross-country section of the pipeline corridor within Greater Sage-Grouse General Habitat Management Area, which is the entirety, and Priority Habitat Management Area will be completed outside of the CPW recommended timing limitation of March 1 through July 15, is how I read the wildlife protection plan or mitigation plan. So to me, it was a little different, and I didn't see it clarified as a BMP. In the matter of fact, the BMP that I saw in the 2A just mentioned the priority habitat management area sliver as far as I read it. And again, it might be contained in different locations in the 2A that I missed. And so you're stating that it is your intention, and that if not specifically included in the 2A that way, it was your intention to do so.
That is correct. We can go back and double check that, but the intent is definitely to stay out of that TL period for the pipeline. That the section that is cross country through general and priority habitat.
Gotcha. Thank you. I appreciate the clarification. In the CPW determination plan, this is mentioned as well as the wildlife protection plan, but it states that the operator has, it might just be the determination. The operator has agreed to provisions to reroute traffic to the pad location during the restriction period, March 1 to July 15, away from the primary road to avoid impacts to grouse lek sites along the primary access route. My understanding is that plan may have changed a little bit in discussions with Mr. Elm. Can you enlighten me a little bit on that?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Commissioner Ackerman. For this project specifically, there really is only one access route involved. That might have been a clarification issue during discussions with CPW on a different project. That does have an alternative route, but for this pad specifically, there is only one access route to the location. And we have reviewed that with CPW. They did not have any significant issues with the access route. There's a portion of the access that drops down into Garden Gulch, and it's like 1,000. The road's 1,000 feet or so below the top of the rim, where there's where it's inside one of the lek buffers. So they were comfortable with us utilizing that road as it stands.
Thank you, Mr. Tankersley. That was my understanding as well. Thanks for helping us understand that better. And then finally, there was some discussion in the CPW determination summary as well as the wildlife plan about emergency spill response equipment being in close proximity in the event of an accidental spill or release. That was one of the criteria associated with the 1202A3 waiver that was discussed between you and CPW. And so the wildlife plan states that spill response materials would be on site during drilling and completion, and that staged spill response equipment materials would be on the adjacent pad. And again, I might have missed it, but I didn't see those commitments reflected in the BMPs. Can you elaborate for me?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Ackerman. We will have spill response equipment on site at the well pad, the Arco Deep 127 pad, as well as the frac pad, the MV 123. I believe in the wildlife plan there was a BMP that referenced another pad. The name is escaping me at the moment, but it's another Trail Ridge pad that's further to the north, where we have spill response equipment currently staged in the event of a spill or release, and that will be in place for this project as well.
Thank you, Mr. Tankersley and Mr. Kirtland. No further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman. Other commissioners with questions? Commissioner Ackerman, I think you asked all the questions. So with that, we'll move on to commissioner deliberations. Any commissioner willing to begin deliberations? Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll continue with my big mouth here. So I appreciate my fellow commissioners and you affording me the time on this issue. Really, the issue associated with this development is greater sage-grouse, as was aptly described by TEP. Greater sage-grouse is not a currently listed federal species, but unless you've been hiding under a rock, you would know that greater sage-grouse has been the subject of an amazing amount of effort, of coordination, and a multi-state and federal level, and that it's not listed, but it's considered a sensitive species. The general habitat management area that was referenced by Mr. Kirtland and Mr. Tankersley on this project is technically not considered in ECMC regulations as a high priority habitat that requires anything specifically other than a consultation with CPW, which was performed. That's not the case with the priority management area, and you'll see that, as was pointed out, a very small portion of the road ultimately goes through that priority management area. wanted to point out that mitigation's not appropriate in this plan. It's a very small portion, less than 1 acre, doesn't trigger the mitigation requirements. And appropriate measures have been taken to stay out of a small sliver of priority habitat area during that time. But I also wanted to thank TEP for making commitments that are not necessarily required by our regulations, but that are responsible for the protection of greater sage grouse in the area by committing to not have activities for the most part going on during the primary licking period. And greater sage grouse certainly are in the proximity of this area. I think this application has appropriately taken sage grouse conservation and management into the picture. I think commitments have been made where they could be made, and concessions have been made where they could be made, and support this operator's approach to this pad.
Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman. Other commissioners with deliberative thoughts or perhaps a motion?
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chair, that we approve the application as presented, recognizing that in response to my clarification, the responses that Mr. Tankersley gave are either in the 2A or were intended to be in the 2A. Does that pass muster, Councilor Davenport? Or Councilor Mercer, excuse me.
Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman. Yes, so to the extent that that TEP represented that these BMPs, the BMPs that you're interested in are in the wildlife management plan, and that's correct. All of the BMPs in the wildlife management plan are a binding part of the permit, and as well as all of the BMPs in the 2A. If it's the commission's pleasure to direct staff to work with the applicant to incorporate some of those BMPs more explicitly onto the 2A, just for everyone's awareness of what's being required. I think that's certainly a possibility, but it's also perfectly fine to approve it as is, and those requirements stand.
Thank you, Councilor. Appreciate the counsel there. And then my motion, Mr. Chair, would be to approve this application as submitted and presented.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on the application? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries and the application is approved. So thank you all for being here today and presenting the application to us. And I believe that is the last item on our agenda today. I do have a question though, whether we should continue the hearing until tomorrow, understanding there's a hearing tomorrow, or should we adjourn the hearing today and start anew tomorrow?
Mr. Chair, I recommend a motion to adjourn until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Okay. So I'll move adjournment until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you all, and we will see you tomorrow.